name is Hannah Phillips and welcome to the third episode of Under the Brolly Season 2. This podcast aims to educate and inform the wider community about the lesser known sexualities, genders, identities, kinks and fetishes, also collectively known as LGBT+. MyUmbrella LGBT+ is a volunteer project launched by Reading Pride in 2015 to bring awareness to these identities. MyUmbrella can be reached in a number of ways, such as our Twitter, our Facebook and our Instagram, or you can contact us via our contact form on our website. The details are on your screen below. In this episode, we'll be covering Pan Awareness Day and Agender Pride Day, followed by Lucy Hart, a psychological wellbeing practitioner at Talking Therapies, to cover World Mental Health Week. Lucy, please tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name's Lucy. Thank you for having me today. I'm the clinical lead at Talking Therapies in Berkshire, and I'm also a psychological wellbeing practitioner.
Later in the programme, we'll be covering LGBT Domestic Violence Day with Jamie Dewson, a support officer for Support You, who has recently joined Wokenham Advisory Board for Domestic Abuse and Violence, representing the LGBT community. Jamie, please tell us about yourself.
Hello, so thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to raise awareness on domestic abuse and violence. So I work for the LGBT support service and charity, which is Support You, based in Reading, but supporting the LGBT community in the Thames Valley. I specifically work with all people of all ages, all identities, but I do a lot of work with children and young people, facilitating the youth group, offering one-to-one support and working on the helpline, as well as doing lots of other lovely bits in between, because we all know how busy charities are. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Singer-songwriter Nicolette Street will also be joining to talk about her anti-domestic violence song, You're So Cruel. Nicolette also wrote the single charity Sticks and Stones for Reading Pride back in 2011.
Such a long time ago. When you say 2011, I've realised how long ago it was. Hi there. Thank you very much for having me along today, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you all later.
Thank you, Nicolette. We now move on to the first topic for today, Pan Awareness Day. Each year, on the 24th of May, is Pansexual Visibility Day. Much like Bivisibility Day, where bisexual people take off their invisibility cloaks and put on their fetching Bivis jackets. Panvisibility Day is a day to celebrate and recognise those who identify as pansexual. And to help you do that, here are 5 things you should know. The word pansexuality originally comes from Greek, pan meaning all, and is related to words like panorama. Pansexual people aren't attracted to all other people, but they are attracted to people of all genders. And I should note that this is different to being attracted to everyone. In the same way that a heterosexual woman will not be attracted to all men, and how a lesbian woman would not be attracted to all women. Pansexual people will experience attraction to some people, but not all people. It has nothing to do with saucepans or frying pans. Pansexual people have nothing against the old jokes, but joking about someone being sexually attracted to pans isn't just old, it's just not funny. Pansexuality is different to bisexuality, but the two aren't mutually exclusive. Bisexuality means being attracted to more than one gender, whereas pansexuality means that you are attracted to someone regardless of their gender identity or expression. Pansexuality and bisexuality are not in conflict, and some people who identify as bisexual also identify as pansexual, and vice versa. Pansexuality falls under the bisexual umbrella, which covers all areas where an individual has a sexual attraction or romantic attraction to more than one gender identity or expression. There are a lot of famous pansexual people. Recently, the fabulous Janelle Monáe came out as pansexual, and they said that they are open to learn more about who they are. There are other notable pansexual people, such as Miley Cyrus or Angel Hayes or Lilac Green, and the not so quite superhero Deadpool. Being pansexual is just one part of who someone is. A pansexual person may be trans, disabled, or a person of colour, or even all three. Pansexual people come in all ages and sizes and enjoy many activities and hobbies. On Pansexual Day of Visibility, it's so important to remember that we're celebrating pansexual people of all backgrounds and all walks of life.
It's quite interesting how we take for granted panorama and how the word pan is broken down. So pansexuality, panorama, as you say, pan means all.
Obviously, it goes without saying, whoever you are, and whatever identity you have, you shouldn't be invalidated because somebody doesn't understand something. So we should always be willing to learn and listen to things that we don't understand so we can encourage inclusion, and not deny people that we don't understand. That's a us problem. If we don't understand something, that means we have to go away and do the work to understand it, and build on our tolerances, acceptance, because that's how the world goes around. And without that, then it's not going to be a very nice world to live in.
I don't think it's totally as well nowadays necessarily about understanding. I think that there are so many forms now of sexuality that most people are just completely confused by it rather than even trying to understand it. You've got so many gender fluid and this, that, the other, whereas there used to just be straight or gay or bi, then came into it, and either you were straight or gay, or then you were bi, and then it was sort of, well, then you're confused if you're bi. And now there are so many different formats that it's sort of a bit mind-boggling and a bit confusing more than anything. But yeah, like Jamie said, it's all about comprehension and everything, isn't it? It's just getting your head around it more than anything.
I totally agree with what you're saying there. And I think having days like this where we can broaden our understanding are really valuable within our community. So yeah, no, it's fantastic that we can talk about it and think about it and be more inclusive.
Next, we're moving on to Pride Flag, starting with the most well-known of the two, the pansexual Pride Flag. The pansexual Pride Flag was designed as a symbol for pansexual people to use. The flag has been found on various internet sites going back to mid-2010, and it was created by Jasper V. It is similar to the LGBT flag, which is used as a symbol for the lesbians, gay, bisexual and transgender, and everyone else in the community. The flag is used to increase visibility and recognition for the pansexual community. The pansexual flag consists of 3 horizontal bars: magenta, yellow and cyan. The cyan portion of the flag represents the attraction to those who identify as male, may it be biological sex or not. And the magenta portion of the flag represents attraction to those who identify as female, may it be biological sex or not. And finally, the yellow portion of the flag between the magenta and the cyan. The yellow represents attraction to those who fall under the non-binary umbrella. The most commonly used pan-romantic flag looks more or less the same as its pansexual sibling. It has a noticeable heart in the middle of it, essentially overriding the band's meaning from pansexual to pan-romantic.
What is the difference between sexual attraction and romantic attraction then? Are you not supposed to have both? Or am I being silly here?
The main differences between sexual attraction and romantic attraction is that depending on a person, they may have a sexual attraction of one sexuality and a romantic attraction of another sexuality. Right. Therefore, meaning in other cases, you could be sexually attracted to those who present as male, whereas you might only be romantically attracted and would consider dating just for the romantic basis of, all genders and identities.
Okay. All right, cool.
I think it's obviously such a, I don't know what the right word is. It's quite conflicting, I suppose, the aspect of the romantic aspect of it and then the sexual aspect of it. But I think it's completely understandable because when I think about some bi people that I know, they will sometimes say, I don't know what will happen in my future, but I feel that I will probably end up marrying a person of this gender, whereas not this, even though that they are sexually attracted to both. And I don't know why that is. But I think obviously if that's how someone finds their sexuality to be, then who's to say why not? Again, it just comes back to that tolerance and acceptance aspect of things, and we should treat each other as equals.
I think as well, having spoken to people, other people have always said that they always felt they'd, for example, there's a friend I know, and she said, I think I'll always end up in a relationship with a woman, but I've been with men and I'd be very happy with men, but I don't think relationships will work because I just don't have the same emotional bond or emotional tie that with a man that I do with a woman and things like that. So yeah, I think that as well is it regarding relationship wise. It is a confusing thing, but I think again at the end of the day as well, you never know, like Jamie said, you never know who's around the corner or what's around the corner and what's necessarily going to happen. And if you're open to possibilities, then you're going to be open to anything realistically, aren't you? So
100%. Like I always say, I'm very confident within my gender identity and I'm very confident within my sexuality, but who knows what's going to happen in a year's time? I might be down in a, food store getting my shopping, and I might fall in love with a lady. I don't see it happening, but I'm open to it. I feel that an aspect of being bisexual or pansexual that I really, really admire is that it's not the be all or end all to be. Is about sex, really. It's actually about just connecting with someone and it being about that. So I really, really like that. I've always said that I wish the whole world was pansexual, because I feel that the whole world will be a much happier and supportive and accepting place to live. But unfortunately, I say that, and I, as I say, I find myself being very confident and comfortable within my sexuality, which is gay. But yeah, I think it's amazing that people can. I actually feel like it's an amazing, not skill, but an amazing thing about someone, because it shows how compassionate and just open they are to the world and unique experiences. So I really, really do admire that.
And I think, Jamie, exactly what you said there, you just don't know what's around the corner. And the fact that there's these different flags available, that we're kind of acknowledging that differences are okay, because a lot of people are fearful that maybe one day that their sexual orientation may change. But actually having this open forum and conversation and communicating about it makes people more accepting of it. And as you say, it makes it more visible. And yeah, so it's really something that we should all really hold close to us, really. So as you say, we're all compassionate, we all care for each other. It doesn't matter what the sexual orientation is, as long as you're happy within yourself and you're confident in yourself, as you quite rightly say.
I think something as well, though, which is very valid, is that people have fought for gay rights for so many years, and wanting acceptance, and then before that, obviously the women fought for the suffragettes, fought for the right for women, and then obviously slavery, etc. There's always been fighting for absolutely everything, and at the end of the day, I think if you take a step back and think. And religion obviously is a major big one. If you take a step back and think, actually, no one should fight. Everyone should just be accepting of whatever people want to do. If you're not hurting a person and you're not harming a person, anybody's choice is doing the right thing. If you're doing, if you're doing something with someone's permission, for example, and why should people even sit back and even judge anything for anything does if everyone is consensual and everyone is happy and no one is hurting anyone else within the world? Just let love be love, basically just love people and be kind and be open-hearted. And realistically, you have all this fighting throughout generations, and everything about religion and everything is all about love and so on and so forth. And I think that's the way people need to look at things. And not, if you step back and take religion away from it, it's just about just being an open person and caring, and about loving people.
100%. And something that I always say is, if you don't understand something or you struggle to accept something, obviously you're not going to be sitting at my table. But at the same time, like, you can still have an opinion. It's how you share that. And if people, for religious views, can't accept gay marriage or trans people or whatever it is, okay, then leave it at that. And you don't need to then add in a load of hate. I think that's what is the biggest issue. People feel the need that they have to punish people because of things that they can't help, and nor should they have to feel that they need help with something when it's just a normal part of life. Having a sexual attraction to anyone of any gender is the exact same thing to being heterosexual. It's literally the same thing, just with different people. And people really struggle to get their heads around that. And as I say, I think if you can't accept that, then okay, thanks for sharing. Move on. Yeah. Thank you. Next.
And let other people live.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think for so long, as you quite rightly say, we were fighting so much for people to be accepted in this world that's supposed to have a norm. What is norm anymore? We shouldn't have to have a normal. We can be whatever we want to be when we want to be it. There should be no prejudice, and it should just be accepted. And if you can't accept it, I should say, Jamie, step away from the table.
And as you said, it goes back to your original comment, panorama, everything.
Yeah, we just take it for granted. It's in our day-to-day language. So why can't we accept it pansexual? Why does it have to be a question mark? Break it down. We now know where the Greek origin comes from within the word. But yeah.
Absolutely. And I think obviously just linking back to what Hannah was mentioning about the flags as well, it's so important that, we do have the flags to represent the different parts of the LGBT plus community, because that is what provides the individuals with the visibility. Yeah. So it's an added on extra on top of the label. And I know that there can be negative connotations around the labels. So sometimes actually just having a flag can be a lot more to a person.
I was going to say, no, to do the labels, when people have labels, they feel like they're stereotyped, or they may perhaps feel that they're pigeonholed into a box. But with a flag, not only does it have that symbolism, it represents you in a different way, but also it sparks inquisitive natures in people to think, oh, what does that actually mean? And it encourages that conversation to open up and understand, actually, well, this is what it means to be me. And again, it just brings us back to that full circle and cycle of, well, we need to be more accepting and open to understanding different perspectives on things.
Now we move on to Agender Pride Day, which takes place on the 19th of May. To be agender means that a person identifies as no particular gender. Agender is also known as gender blank, gender free, gender void, non-gendered, ungendered, or null-gendered. Previously, some of these terms have been a little bit controversial within the community. The agender identity falls under the non-binary umbrella and sometimes the transgender umbrella. The Agender Pride flag was created in 2014 by Salom X. It has 7 horizontal stripes starting from the top to bottom. It is black, grey, white, green, white, grey, black. Both the black and the white bands represent a complete absence of gender. Grey represents being semi-genderless, and the green represents non-binary because it's the inverse of purple.
The thing that I would ask to encourage that understanding is, with being non-binary, it's very much about not putting yourself into a box because you don't feel comfortable with the norm that society expects us to put ourselves into. So I suppose, as an LGBT support officer, I have a question. What's the difference between being agender or non-binary?
I think that's a very good question. I think there's an element where agender is where you identify as no gender, where you literally do not connect with any gender identity and therefore identify with something that isn't a gender identity. And I think non-binary, when we think about the binaries of gender identities, we think male and female, and anything outside of that box, is then entering the category of non-binary. And I think there's an element there where you have to think about how the trans umbrella has non-binary underneath it. So then you have your stereotypical trans people who may be male to female or female to male. And then you have that outer area which may contain more like gender fluidity and bigender and pangender. And I think there's an element where when you think about non-binary covering all of that spectrum, agender probably comes under that section.
I suppose as well, when we think about what it means to be non-binary, you're right, with the binary, it's very much boys wear blue, girls wear pink, boys play football, girls do dance, whereas agender, I suppose, is completely taking away all of those roles. So you don't put yourself into either or, so you don't maybe experiment with both. I know that some non-binary friends of mine, you know, they're fabulous people, absolutely fabulous, and some of them will, you know, wear some, like, I suppose it shouldn't be, but it is like sort of not the norm, unfortunately, when it should just be wear what you want. But I suppose with what I'm trying to say is with non-binary people, they might explore with different gendered items of clothing and things to do, whereas someone that's agender might remove themselves completely from that and be their own special creation, I guess.
I think one aspect that's really brought it to light very much though as well is Angelina Jolie bringing up her children the way that she has. It's brought a lot of visibility to this, and people asking more questions and sort of bringing it to the forefront an awful lot. Obviously, with celebrities now having children and saying, look, we want our children just to be brought up however they wish to be, or not talking about any sexuality in any shape or form. That's one thing that made me more aware of it. It's that it hit the news lines again, merely over Angelina Jolie actually and her children, the way she does it.
Mm. And I think it's important to reinforce that agender is a gender identity, so this isn't necessarily a choice or it isn't necessarily a way of life. This is solely how someone identifies, and I think that's the core route of how important this conversation should be. I think there's an element, personally, I know I'm the host, I shouldn't be vocalizing my own opinions and stuff, but I think there is an element, you know, where no matter how someone identifies, no matter what they do, you know, I think there's an element where when you think about the non-binary community and you think about agender in particular, there's almost a point where stereotypically a person has to be androgynous and completely like neutral. And I think when you think about famous celebrities such as, I don't know, Sam Smith, they have more of a masculine appearance and it's not necessarily 100% androgynous or more leaning towards the feminine spectrum. But there are many other people, such as some of the drag queens on RuPaul's Drag Race, you know, they're also within this like agender non-binary category of their, you know, that's how they identify. And, you know, they don't necessarily, again, go for this more androgynous way that is stereotypically portrayed in the media.
I'm so glad that you raised it about androgynous and the difference there, because I think it's quite easy to get it either confused or mistaken. So thank you for highlighting that.
Hosted by the Mental Health Foundation, Mental Health Awareness Week takes place this year between the 10th and the 16th of May. And the theme for this year is nature. We are now joined by Lucy Hart, a psychological well-being practitioner from Talking Therapies. So what is Talking Therapies?
So Talking Therapies is a mental health service based across Berkshire. So we cover Reading, Newbury, Wokingham, Slough, Bracknell, Windsor, Ascot and Maidenhead. And we support individuals aged 17 and above to improve their mental health and well-being. And as we're based as an NHS service, all our consultations, treatment and workshops are all free of charge. So if you notice any change in your mood or wanted some support to improve your well-being, we would encourage you to access our service through our website or to get a referral through your GP. And I guess our team's made up of cognitive behavioural therapists, counsellors, psychological wellbeing practitioners, and we're all qualified healthcare professionals with different strategies to help you to improve your mood.
So, what is a psychological wellbeing practitioner?
Yes, so a psychological wellbeing practitioner, it's a bit of a mouthful. So we usually get referred to as PWPs, and we're qualified mental health practitioners. So we can assess you for if you're experiencing any difficulties to understand what you're experiencing. And then we can help you to decide what would feel like the most appropriate treatment for you based on what your goals are for treatment. And we also deliver treatment ourselves. So we can help people who experience mild to moderate symptoms of anxiety, low mood, or anxiety disorders like phobias, social anxiety, and health anxiety.
Is the service open to anybody?
Yes, it is open to everybody. And something that I'm really quite passionate about is improving access to LGBT plus people. And my interest in improving diversity and inclusion within our service has been long-standing. And I've always identified as an LGBT plus ally. And I noticed during treatment that not many people from the LGBT plus community were actually reaching out to our service. And research actually shows that 1 in 7 LGBT plus people avoid treatment because of the fear of discrimination. And that's something that just didn't quite sit right with me. So I stepped up and proposed to the service that we needed a champion for the role and to improve access to our Talking Therapies service. Both myself and Talking Therapies believe it's everyone's right to have a good mental health. Every mental health service should have, should be accessible and inclusive to everybody. And we know that being LGBT plus doesn't automatically mean that you have a mental health problem. But we do know that people who are of that community sometimes do experience poorer mental health. And this is probably linked back with feelings of being bullied or rejected or stigmatized or discriminated against, which then can consequently lead to low self-esteem, low mood, anxiety, and feeling really quite isolated. And if we think back to what research has shown us, is that half of the people in the LGBT plus population have experienced depression, and 3 in 5 experience some sense of anxiety. And it also impacts us in the sense of suicide rates. And sometimes it's something that a lot of people shy away from having a conversation about, but it's something that needs to be discussed more so, because 1 in 8 individuals who are aged 18 to 24 have attempted to end their life. And almost half trans people have thought about taking their own lives. And so as the LGBT plus champion within our service, I'm really looking at encouraging colleagues to listen, to step up and be visible, to speak up. And so there's various things that we're doing in order to show that we are open, we're accessible. We want to encourage people to come forward and work with us if they feel like they need some support. So the different things that we're implementing to encourage people to reach out to us are adding things like our pronouns to the bottom of our email signatures, also including the NHS NHS logo that's got the rainbow on it, wearing our rainbow lanyards, rainbow badges around the hospitals, particularly when we're back after COVID. They may not feel like massive changes, but it's a way for us just to kind of highlight, to identify that actually, yeah, we're here to listen, we're here to show you compassion, and we just want to support you. It doesn't matter what background that you come from. And I'm also looking at delivering some training to our service and thinking about ways to communicate with each other. So there isn't that sense of fear or unknown. Like we were speaking a moment ago about the different flags and visibility, encouraging people to have that conversation with the patients. You don't have to, when you refer to us, state what your sexual orientation is or your gender identity. But if that's something that's contributing to the way that you're feeling, we want to make sure that you feel like you're heard by your therapist. So they feel like they can approach you and have that conversation. And there's that mutual understanding there. And you feel supported by us and feel safe.
Have you noticed any changes in people's emotional distress or mental health during the pandemic?
Short, easy answer, yes. And I think that is a given. We're not invincible. Our mental health's fluid. Our emotions are fluid. We're going to have days where we feel greater and other days that feel like a challenge. And that's okay. if our mood was the same throughout the course of our lives, I'd be slightly concerned, but also it's something that will change. And during the pandemic, a lot of things that initially we used to help us to manage our well-being have been taken away from us, or may have been adapted in some way. So like our social networks, things that we used to enjoy doing, like, say, perhaps going to the gym, they were less accessible for us. I say that as I appreciate now lockdown has eased slightly. But yes, to answer the question, yes, there was a change in people's emotions during lockdown.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in response to what you mentioned about you being the champion within Talking Therapies, like, thank you, because we need people like you. But also it's really, really nice to hear that in your departments that you're working with, this is happening and that you are trying to improve that inclusion and really hear people from the community that I identify with. Working for an LGBT plus support service, specifically for people of this community, we get a lot of referrals from different organisations, and quite often their case and their needs will not have anything to do with their sexuality or gender identity, but they will get referred to us. So it's really nice to hear that, you know, there are people within some of these organisations that are really, really sort of working towards improving that, because as you said earlier, being LGBT plus does not make you have mental health problems. It increases the chances, unfortunately, we know that. And you have such a great understanding of why that is. You know, you hit the nail on the head. There's so many other things that feed into that. But yeah, it's just really nice to know that the services are trying to sort of show that they're there, because it can be really frustrating when you receive a referral from an organisation and their case has nothing in relation to LGBT specific stuff. So it's just really, really nice to know that these conversations are happening, and it's because of people like you.
Thank you.
I'm very, very sadly, actually, Lucy, you reminded me that about the suicide rate was a lovely trans girl that was on on the single Sticks and Stones that we did for Reading Pride and sadly committed suicide a number of years ago. That was Chrissy Edkins, who's absolutely lovely, and mental health, obviously, like you said, has been on the rise and on the rise and the rise. And I've got a lot of people, and actually I live in Wales now. And I've got to say, there's an awful lot of people when you speak to them who do suffer from anxiety or depression or mental health. And I'm not just saying that's in Wales. I'm just saying, you know, it's a lot of people talk about it here, and it's. But I'm being devil's advocate a little bit here. So please, but it's like a lot of people say I've got mental health so much that people start going, okay, it's being used as a crutch. And I think that actually takes away from the people that then also that do really have mental health. And, you know, it's about people with mental health, again, having the right inroads to go and talk to people and get the help, and that they can do something, and they can take medication, or they can talk to people, or they can really do something in order to, you know, not necessarily the meds. There's ways past that, to talking to people like yourselves to find the trigger points and you know, help work against the anxieties and the angst and stuff. And it has become such a word that a lot of people sort of, again, in a sense of the whole, you know, day to day, a lot of people put a wall up and don't necessarily even then try to understand why it is and find the reasoning behind it and find the triggers and find what it potentially is to actually help this, you know, what it is that could help this person and stuff, and sitting there and being patient about people. And a very good friend of mine suffers from very, 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 very bad mental health, and, you know, has been in has been in rehab for many years and has relapsed a number of times. And I find it actually, the fact that she's so open and talks about it, for me, you know, I'm very, very proud of her, to be perfectly honest, because it takes an awful lot for someone to say, I have a problem that I really need to deal with. And the first thing you have to do in order to come to terms with the fact that you know, to improve yourself, is to accept that you have something up with you. But then I think at the point where you're accepting it, you've then got to start working on yourself. You can't just say, well, I've got this, and then, you know, that's it. You've got to start working yourself, which is where it's perfect to then go to people like yourselves and go to support you and actually really seek the help that's required to move on and improve your life.
And I think it's really important what you highlighted there, mental health. So mental health, we all experience different levels of it. So I think it's thinking about perhaps on a spectrum where it sits. Now, we're not discrediting people who may be having days that are more challenging than others compared to those who may be experiencing severe symptoms. And with Talking Therapies, we're open to everybody. We're here to support you to move forward. If we can identify what you're experiencing, what your goals are, we will support you to make those changes. And as I say, we have workshops, we have one-to-one treatment, and we're here to support you to identify what it is that you want to work on. And if we're not quite right for you, we will look at supporting you and signposting you to the next most appropriate steps for you. So whether that may be looking at perhaps employment support, wellbeing support, we might signpost you, say, to other services that are external to us, but it doesn't mean that your voice isn't going to be heard. Like you said, that first step is actually picking the phone up and calling us. And that is something that's really brave. Identifying that today I don't feel quite great, and this has been ongoing for a good couple of weeks. So what am I going to do about it? And it can be overwhelming, that initial phone call. And it's something that I say quite a lot to my patients, is that I'm proud of you. The most important thing that you've done is pick up that phone today. Whether you wanted to talk to me or not is a different thing, but at least you've picked that phone up and you've said at least something to get the ball rolling.
I think as well, though, in a sense, a lot of people sort of signify it a little bit with shame as well, and they feel embarrassed to do it, because in the old days, if you know, in the old days, you didn't have someone you could talk to for mental health in any shape or form. You were just told to pull your socks up, get on with it and deal with it, go to work, sort your rubbish out and get on with it, you know. And the fact that there's so many avenues now that you can go to, but I think because of the old things where you say, I'm really sorry, I'm having an off day, people are like, oh, don't be so stupid, go to work, get on with it. It makes people feel like they're a bit, you know, feel slightly
discredited,
having, and embarrassed, and like, well, most people are coping, so why shouldn't I cope? You know,
and that's the thing. A lot of people think, well, everybody else is fine, I should be fine. No, it's okay. It's okay that just because somebody else is doing something that you're not, it's okay if you say, well, actually, maybe I need to address that. And as you were saying earlier, in the sense of it's accepting that you need to make that change. You can come to our service, we can support you as much as we can, but it's you who needs to put those strategies into place. We can give you the techniques, we can give you the tools, we can support you, but that behavioural change, that change in your mindset is only going to take place if you start implementing them into your day-to-day life.
Plus also, I think what people potentially forget about is that society has changed so much now. And in the past, families used to be much closer together in the sense that there wasn't the communications in the sense of phones and you know, phones and transport. And 100 years ago, you'd have families all living in a village together and you wouldn't necessarily leave. So you would have a support of your family. Nowadays, people live and work all over the world, and actually the only communication you potentially have is your phone, or you look it up online, and then you've got you know, you have the old forms of bullying, but on top of that you're looking at other people's lives on Facebook where they're saying, look at my great life, where they're not necessarily having a great life, but it's about making people think that you're happy and you're this and you're that and life's great and you've got this, you've got that, and people are seeing what others say they've got and comparing themselves to it, which actually makes people less contented in their life and more miserable with their life, saying, well, how come they've succeeded at this? How come they've managed to get this house? How come they've managed to get this car? I work 24/7. I haven't got there. I haven't done this, you know. And then connecting via text message to people isn't the same as seeing someone's face. And as I think people have discovered over lockdown with mental health going up, just having a hug from a person or having physical contact in the sense of even your arm being touched or your shoulder being touched, or just, you know, the expression on people's face and stuff like that. It's so much more important for people face to face and again, from that point to talking to people than texting. And life has changed so much. I think people have to take a step back and say, we have to communicate differently nowadays. And, if we have to do it via the phone, or we have to talk to someone, or we have to go in and see someone, you don't necessarily have the family pod that you used to have in the old days.
And comparison is a thief of joy. We sit on social media and compare ourselves. I know I do. I sit and scroll through and I'm like, oh, someone's having a great day. Oh, right, okay, brilliant. But we don't share those days where perhaps not feeling as great. And that sometimes is worth in itself. We start to then fester within ourselves. Why am I not progressing? Why am I not as good? And like I say, comparison is the thief of joy. But we tend to notice that when we're feeling really quite low in mood, we avoid things. And whether it may be interacting with people. So we may see, for example, we're feeling really quite low because we've compared ourselves to, oh, well, they're out for a walk with a friend at the social distance and I'm shielding at home. And then so we might then avoid the opportunity to have a phone call with a family or a friend because we just don't want to have that, how are you today? And then you go, oh, I don't really want to answer that question. I know I'm guilty of it. Some days when I'm not feeling great, I'm just like, actually, I don't really want to reply right this second. And we might put it off. And it's that avoidance of things that actually maintains that cycle of low mood.
Yeah, and what's very true is straight away and immediately when you start talking to someone, actually you feel better.
Yeah, definitely.
Because at that point as well, you're not self-indulging your thoughts. You're actually communicating and thinking about what the other person is saying as well, and it's taking it away from the fact where you're just sitting there and spiraling downwards and downwards and downwards.
Yeah.
I think it is very important. The best thing you can do is pick up the phone and have a conversation with a person. Even if you say I feel terrible, at some point you're going to say, well, what have you been up to? And at that point, you can start talking about, well, what, and what do you want to do? And what were you going to do and stuff? And it straight away takes away from the black hole that you were sitting in, just with me, myself, and I, having a conversation with yourself, which, okay, I have to admit, I do frequently have conversations with myself. And then it makes you absolutely crazy because you can do nothing other than think obsessively of what you're talking about. So I think it's very important to communicate with people. That is, like you said, step number one is reaching out to someone, no matter how you're feeling. And the most important day actually is not about just sharing the joy. It's about sharing your anxieties and your griefs.
Yeah. And something that we really encourage when we're feeling low in mood, as I say, we tend to avoid things. So that doing thing actually gives us a sense of fulfillment and achievement. So whether it's talking to somebody or if in that moment in time, we can't quite face having that conversation, doing something, go for a walk, go for a run if you fancy it, do something at your own pace. Do something that you used to enjoy. So if you used to have a favourite meal, cook it for yourself. Watch your favourite Netflix documentary. Sit and binge Netflix if it's going to help you feel good. But just try not to avoid things. So if you say, I'm going to go see my friend on Thursday at 10 o'clock, stick to it. Do it. Hold yourself accountable because you cancel last minute. You're only removing the opportunity for yourself to have that positive feeling, to actually do something with your day.
Did you know, pre-pandemic, we travelled over 5,000 miles by road and by train, supporting Pride events across the whole of the south coast of the United Kingdom. We have also officiated training events for many blue chips and global corporations, presenting to them what they need to know to be more inclusive of the LGBT plus community. You can watch all of our previous episodes of Under the Brolly from our website. Please don't forget to click that like and subscribe button. And not forgetting the bell icon to ensure that you get the notifications for every upload of Under the Brolly. We also have a store where you can buy our guide to LGBT+. And this helps us do what we do in these more challenging times. The International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia was created in 2004. To bring awareness to the violence and discrimination which lesbians, gays, bisexual and transgender and intersex people face. It was created to draw attention to the discrimination and violence that lesbians, gays, bisexual and transgender and intersex people face. The date, May 17th, was specifically chosen to celebrate the decision from the World Mental Health Organization to declassify homosexuality as a mental disorder. It is now celebrated in over 130 countries, including 37 where same-sex relationships were illegal, including 37 where same-sex activities are illegal throughout the planet. Thousands of initiatives, big and small, are reported throughout the planet. To learn more about the day, you can visit www.may17.org.
I think that this is a really, really important day because especially for schools, colleges, universities, this is a really, really good way of getting them involved. And if I remember correctly, this is the day where schools encourage students to wear purple t-shirts and tops to school for the day. So it's a day of really marking that it's not okay. And especially when we know that in schools, we hear "that's so gay" used as a negative term constantly. I actually have some people in my life who have said that around me before. And you can see them kind of go a little bit red with shame after saying it, because it's like, oh, I don't think I should have said that. And I had a big rant about this on my social media platforms the other day. And it's so important that we do acknowledge that that is homophobia. It's not acceptable. If a gay person uses that saying, it's reclaiming, so it's different. But if you have someone who is cis and heterosexual using that term, it's not okay, because you are using the term with negative connotations. Now, I have seen firsthand this happen so many times online, and a little bit about my personal life. Some people that I've dated in the past who haven't been out, they will upload a new profile picture on Facebook, or they'll post a new photo on Instagram, and you will see their friends comment, "You look so gay," or "That's so gay." I know, looking at that they are actually gay. Their friends don't, because they haven't come out yet. So what people are doing that they don't realise, which they need to wake up and realise, is by using this term, and there's many other terms also aimed at trans people and gender non-conforming people. So it's not just a thing that happens to gay people, it's across the board. People need to accept that is discrimination. That is verbally hate. And you are adding to the suppression of someone's sexuality or gender identity. Unwillingly or not, it's not okay. And if you are listening today and you can recognise that you say this, or you have said it before, then you need to really take this moment to have a chat with yourself. Why and since when has gay been a word with negative connotations representing bad? If we think back to the word gay, it used to represent happy. So now, gay is a sexual identity, but now it's also a word that we're using in a negative way. And that is really, really, really harmful to someone that you might not know who is struggling with their identity. And when we think back to the mental health that Lucy has spoken to us about today, that's detrimental. It's really detrimental.
You could not have put it better. They literally spot on. That phrase, "oh, that's so gay," makes my blood boil. What right does anyone have to turn around and say that to somebody? You wouldn't turn around and be like, "oh, that's so Asian, that's so Indian, that's so straight." You're right. Let's think back to what actually gay meant as a word in itself. Its origin is to be happy. But then why are you then bounding that around, calling people it? Think, like you say, if it's something that you've used in the past, think about why you said it, and if that's because you were unsure of how to address that individual. Because sometimes people don't say it in malice. Sometimes people may say it because they're unsure of what the correct word is to say. Maybe they're not too sure of what's politically correct. And as we said before, it's thinking about, some people might actually be quite fearful of if they're saying things that are right. They don't want to offend somebody, it comes out wrong altogether. And if, say, for example, you don't know how to address somebody, ask that individual how they would like to be addressed.
I think there's this area in particular in relation to, you were saying about how the connotation about gay is seen, you know? When we talk about "that's so gay" as a phrase, we're often referring to something that's dull or boring or something quite negative, you know? For example, you might be like, hey, yeah, I enjoy doing sewing, and someone could be like, oh, that's so gay. But they don't necessarily mean it in a sense of the intent to insult someone saying, hey, you're gay, but actually the activity itself is kind of, you know, maybe just not of their particular interest, so they're finding it like, this is boring, but they're expressing it saying that's so gay.
Absolutely. And I think that this is, you know, in the past, when people have said it around me, I've kind of, to be honest, let it go under the carpet. But when you do the job that I do and you see the impact that has on someone, it's not okay. So I think we have to get to a point where even if we, you know, don't mean to offend people of the community with this term, unfortunately, you know, some gay people might be like, yeah, I don't care about people saying that. Like, I know it's not meant in that way. But when we see the people who are struggling to come out, or the people that are struggling to accept themselves, and you've got their friends, their family members using this phrase in a negative connotation, all you are doing is pushing that person into a scarier place. You are setting them back from ever getting to a point that they feel ready to come out. And unfortunately, this is a massive issue that schools really need to tackle, because a lot of the young people that I work with, they say that they hear this about 3 times a day at school. And from what I understand, the young people don't really, if it's flagged, not much is done, because unfortunately it's a comment, so there's no proving. And then some members of staff at schools might not think it's bad to say, and not understanding the impact that it can have. So I just think people have to be mindful. As Lucy says, we wouldn't say this to discriminate against people of different things. So why are we doing it here? It's not okay. It's not cool. And to be honest, when you say it, you just look stupid, in my opinion.
You talked about and brought up the factor about teachers not knowing whether or not "that's so gay" is a good enough phrase to be used in class, or, you know, whether or not. And I know in some cases, some schools have outright banned the word gay, not as a word that you can use to describe your friends, but it's kind of just like, you can't say to your friend, hey, you're gay, like, are you gay? Like, you know, casual, because, you know, a lot of queer people tend to connect at school and have their queer group of friends, especially nowadays, compared to like 10 years ago when that wasn't a thing that people did at school. You know, but teachers overhearing the queer groups talking about sexuality and stuff, teachers being like, okay, gay's a bad word, detention, detention, detention. And there's almost a point where it has to be always known with the intent, you know, there's got to be that idea. And I think there is that aspect where you have to understand that gay is an okay word to say, but using it in certain situations is just not appropriate anymore.
Exactly. I was going to pick up on your comment there, that just because you use the word gay, let's try not to demonize it. It's sometimes it depends in what context it's being said. And I think that's the important take-home message. If you're not too sure what it means or how it may be in the context of a sentence, maybe use a different word. If it may be something that could be causing offence, think about it before you speak, really. Let's try not to demonize it.
Many victims and survivors of domestic and family violence, abbreviated as DFV, in LGBT plus relationships, often feel invisible, and that no one will believe them. To ensure that every victim and survivor's voice is heard, an annual LGBT plus Domestic Violence Awareness Day was established in Australia 2020 to raise awareness of DFV in LGBT plus communities. Remember the victims of whom have lost their lives, recognise the survivors, and acknowledge the struggles of people who are in abusive relationships. We strongly feel that the UK should be adopting this National Awareness Day. Let us know what you think in the comments down below. We bring back Lucy Hart from Talking Therapies, and are also now joined by Jamie Dewson, a support officer for Support You, who has recently joined the Wokenham Advisory Board for Domestic Abuse and Violence, representing the LGBT plus community. What is domestic abuse/violence?
So domestic abuse and violence is an incident, or it can be a pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening and abusive behaviour, which can also be broken down into lots of different subcategories. So you've got psychological abuse, you've got the physical abuse, you've got sexual abuse, financial abuse, and there's lots and lots more. These are just some that are recognised. Another form that we are seeing a lot more of is abuse taking place online. And this can be using revenge porn, which is something that has been increasing a lot, which can often, in the gay world and the LGBT plus world, can very much link to outing people as well. So there's lots of different ways that domestic abuse and violence can take place.
Who is affected by DAV?
So domestic abuse and violence is domestic. So it can affect anyone, which I think is the most important thing that we make really clear from the off. Anyone is vulnerable to domestic abuse and violence. Something that we hear so much from survivors is, I never thought it would be me. So I think that really, really has to be at the forefront of our mind. We might think that we are strong enough that if anything ever happened, we would know how to handle it. But in reality, we don't know what situations we're going to find ourselves in. And the thing with domestic abuse and violence is it's not as easy as just walking out, because there's a lot of love, there's a lot of feelings, you have been coerced. So it's really easy to say, why don't they just leave him or her or them? It's really easy to say that, but the reality of how true that is on another level. But focusing in more on, LGBT plus people, it's known that we are more vulnerable to find ourselves in these situations. And I think that the key is the word domestic. So when we think about domestic, we think of being at home with our families. And sadly, something that we see a lot, specifically with young LGBT plus people, is that they can be abused by their family because of their identity. And this is something that happens everywhere. When I joined Support You, I was very naive looking back, thinking that I was going to be working with people on coming out and finding self-acceptance. But my God, since I've worked at Support You, the things I've seen and the things I've heard, it's really prevalent, and it's something that we see a lot of, and it's hard. So I completely agree with what you said, Hannah, at the beginning about really sort of trying to establish the National Day of Recognition in the United Kingdom, because this isn't a problem that's just in other countries. This is a massive problem in the UK, massive.
Why is it important that we recognise LGBT plus DAV in the UK?
So I think it's really important because obviously, as I just mentioned, it's really prevalent. And it's very slept on. People aren't aware how much of an issue that this is. And without the recognition, things can't improve, because it's not going to have the funding put into it to support it. It's not going to have the understandings. And also just in terms of, the young people, again, schools really need to be aware of this, because, in terms of a young person's development and their well-being, if they are being suppressed or abused because of their identity, then that's going to have a massive, massive impact on their mental health, but also their development at school. So I think this is another place where we really need to encourage that understanding in schools, so they can aid and know what the warning signs of that might be. For example, warning signs, might be, in terms of physical, it might be bruises. It might be not wanting to get changed in the changing rooms. That can obviously be due to other reasons as well. But there's lots of things to look out for. So, and as I always say, if you are someone that wants to be an ally, or you want to gain more of an understanding about anything LGBT plus related, you don't have to be LGBT plus to reach out to Support You on our helpline. We are equally here for the allies and for families. So, with cases that I've worked on, I always try and encourage parents who might be struggling to accept their child's identity to give us a call, because we don't want to sit here and say, you're a bad person, you should be, we want to work with that family to help them understand that being LGBT plus is not an issue. Of course, if the abuse is beyond a certain point, from maybe psychological and beyond that point, then the appropriate action would be taken, where unfortunately we'd have to flag that if it's something that we've been made aware of, to look after the well-being of our young persons. But equally, to make it really clear as well, it's not just young people that this happens with, it's people of all ages. So we know that older people are quite often finding themselves in scary situations because they are LGBT plus, and when they are going into older homes when they're older, or residential care, unfortunately we know that abuse can take place there too. I think it can often be referred to as being pushed back into the closet, because they are suppressed. Because if you have a person who isn't capable of dressing themselves, they might be gender non-conforming and they might like to wear all different types of things, but their carers might not give them that choice. They might not allow, and that's something that we see. And I know that in Manchester, they are currently working on creating LGBT plus specific old homes for people, well, not necessarily old homes, just like a place for older people to sort of retire to, which is an amazing thing. Amazing. So it is across the board. It can happen in so many different ways. And I think it's just important to remember there's a massive misconception that domestic abuse is in a relationship, which it is a lot of the time. But also we really need to remember that it's happening within families, it's happening within schools, it's happening within workplaces. So it's not just in a relationship. So again, we need to be really, really mindful and aware of what those warning signs might be.
I think another important thing to mention on it as well, though, is very much the old saying is a man should never hit a woman. However, when it gets to LGBT, if a man hits a man or a woman hits a woman, it's sort of, in a sense, it's just like, well, no one should be violent towards each other, but it's not the person that's hit the other person. For example, if a woman hits a woman or a man hits a man, it's almost just like a fight. It's not actually deemed as domestic violence or something. It's like, well, it's just a scuffle or things like that, and it sort of a little bit gets diminished in how in how important it is to still accept the fact bullying is bullying, and again, violence is violence, and there should be no violence, full stop. It 100%. Doesn't matter what sexuality you are at all. Again, for me, I 100% believe it doesn't matter if you're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, plus, or straight, any of these things. It is important that, again, violence is not acceptable, full stop.
And I think it's really quite interesting what you say about making it more something that's aware of within schools, because if, say, for example, like you say, it's violence is violence, it doesn't matter if it's man to man, woman to woman, it's making sure that any of those warning signs are acknowledged. And if, say, for example, a child has witnessed it and that's mentioned, making sure that there's a clear form of communication, not only from schools, social services, within Talking Therapies itself. I know that I've worked on cases where we've had a multidisciplinary team around the care of an individual, because we know that there are other things that are going on that contributing to what is going on at home and how home life can then transpire and how that person's feeling.
Absolutely. And Gallup, the National LGBT Domestic Abuse and Violence Helpline, they reported that victims under the age of 25 were more likely than any other age group to disclose abuse by a family member. And focusing in on that again, just to make it very clear, that's LGBT plus young people. So we know that the abuse is taking place largely under the age of 25, which I find mind-boggling and heartbreaking.
It's quite a shocking statistic, really.
Has that increased during lockdown then? Because they do say that domestic violence has increased an awful lot during lockdown.
Absolutely. So in terms of, the work that I've done personally at Support You and the work that my colleagues have done, I know for me, I've definitely seen cases where people have been asked to keep their identities hidden from other family members, which that might seem small, but actually on a scale, looking at it, that's psychological abuse. You are literally telling someone to keep something hidden about themselves. And especially for people who are trans, who are struggling to accept themselves or trying to navigate things and work out where they fit into this crazy world, presenting has been a huge issue, because they haven't really had that freedom of being able to go out. So, being stuck at home with their family, it's just really limiting. And some people may take that away from their children or young people or older children as well that might still live at home. So it's definitely increased. I know that there's been some reports, which I'll send over to the production team so that they can include them into the information when they push it out, in terms of COVID and domestic abuse and violence.
What cases have you supported in the Thames Valley?
So obviously with this one, I have to be very limited with what I share, completely appreciating and respecting the confidentiality of our lovely service users. That's Support You's most important principle. But in terms of the cases that I have personally worked on, it's, as I mentioned, it can really vary. It might be something that seems small, such as a parent telling their young person to suppress themselves, or it could be a relationship where there's been abuse, including families. I have worked on quite a few cases where family has really been the perpetrator or perpetrators, which is, again, just heartbreaking, because when we think of family, we think of that being the place where the love is and the support is and the encouragement is, not abuse. And when I say abuse, I am talking about physical, I'm also talking about sexual, and I'm also talking about all of the other things that I've said in the Thames Valley. So I know that's really scary and triggering to hear, but I really want people to take that away. And again, thinking about when I came to Support You, I was quite naive and thinking it would be like coming out cases, which a lot of it is. But at the same time, these cases, I think I was living under a rock, because, it's very easy to forget about these things that might be happening. But I can share that in the Thames Valley, I have worked on cases where people have been sexually abused as a form of conversion therapy in the family's eyes, which I know is a big topic at the moment, but it really, really does take place. And I think people need to really be aware of that.
What support is available?
Support You offers a helpline. We offer counselling. We offer one-to-one support workers, and we also offer support groups. We recently did a campaign, which was Support You Stands With You, focusing in on the domestic abuse and violence. And we did see an increase in people reaching out, which is really, really bittersweet. We'd like it not to increase, because it means that hopefully things are changing positively. But it's good to know that people are aware of us being here to support them through these difficulties. But in terms of sort of on a national scale, you've got Gallup, which is the National Domestic Abuse helpline for LGBT people. And you've also got Switchboard, another helpline that is available. But in terms of in the Thames Valley, Support You can, assign you a caseworker who can work with you, support you, and just be there for you, whether that's over the phone. At the minute, all of our services are virtual, which is interesting. But the support is still continued, and people are still benefiting from our service. So, even though it's not necessarily face-to-face at this moment in time, hopefully it will be soon, but don't let that put you off. We can still provide you with that support that you're looking for. And just quickly as well, one statistic that I wanted to share today. So the Albert Kennedy Trust, which is an LGBT homeless charity, they're national. They recently reported that 61% of LGBT young people felt threatened or frightened by their family members before they became homeless or were made homeless by their parents. And another one that's really, really important to hear is the Albert Kennedy Trust have also just released that 16% of young LGBT people were forced to do sexual acts against their will by their family members as a way to correct their sexuality. That's in the United Kingdom, both of those stats.
That's crazy that that's still happening.
24% of homeless young people in the United Kingdom are LGBT plus. That's just under 1/4 of homeless young people, and that still happens. So when you hear people say, "Why do we need days like Pride? Why do we still need days like a National Day Against Domestic Homophobia and Transphobia?" It's like, this is why.
And of the 24% though that are homeless, is that because they've been thrown out or they've choose to leave because the situation is so bad at home, or?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's 77% of the 24% believe that the reason they were made homeless was because of their identity.
I'm interested to know that during lockdown, as with quite a few different services, there's been an increase in referrals. And I'm wondering whether there's been a clear distinction between perhaps an older generation who may be coming out as opposed to a younger generation, or has it been quite consistent with the age range of the referrals is what I'm interested to know.
Completely across the board. So the referrals we receive, some people might be in their 80s, some people might be, we had one last week that was for a 12-year-old. So it really does vary. And that can be on coming out. So some people might be wanting to come out in later life because they have been suppressing themselves for that long, or it might be that they, as we mentioned earlier, things in life change. So they might have, had a bit of an awakening later on in life. So yeah, it really varies, really varies. And the issues are completely various as well, I guess, completely.
So say, for example, you had a friend who you knew perhaps was questioning their sexuality or unsure if they may be experiencing domestic violence. What could you do in that situation to support them?
Listen is the first one. Just listen. And don't put any pressure. I think from personal experience, when I've had people close to me in relationships that have been abusive, I remember saying, leave them. You need to leave them. It's probably the most unhelpful thing you can do. And that's something that I've massively took away from the campaign that we did at Support You. But yeah, just listen. And sometimes they might not want to communicate, or they might not be able to communicate. Remember that there's more ways than communicating them. Just having a chat, writing things down, saying something out loud can be a really big thing, especially if we're talking about physical or sexual abuse. For someone to say that out loud, that's a really hard thing. So I think remember that you could write it on a piece of paper, like, are you okay? And just pass it to them, because they might feel more able to disclose something, because it takes that pressure away from saying out loud. And also, if you are concerned, remember that services such as Support You are not just there for people in need. It could be for you as an ally, you as a friend, you as a family member. If you suspect something, we are here to support you as well as the young person or the adult or whoever it might be. So just listen, be ready, and I think be patient is the main one, because no one can do anything until they're ready. And though they might be subjected to some really awful things, there's still ties that are really difficult to cut when it might be their parent, so it's, or someone that is their first love, or so, because remember that coercive behavior really comes in where, we can see that the manipulation comes in. It's, apart from me, you don't really have anyone though, or what would you do without me? And these are the things that are being said and used all the time. So just be patient, continue that support, and avoid putting pressure on them. Just as long as they know that you're there for the long run, I think that for them will be enough.
Before we close this episode, I would like to introduce singer-songwriter Nicolette Street, who is going to talk about her song You're So Cruel and how it relates to LGBT plus Domestic Violence Day.
Oh yeah, well, we've obviously talked about an awful lot, which was very interesting, all the stats we got from Jamie, and obviously Lucy's mentioned sort of all the help that people need nowadays, and to make sure you pick up the phone, etc. And I've been involved with Reading Pride, I think, for many years. I think I may have performed at the first one, which is actually really embarrassing, actually, because it was years ago, wasn't it? But that's good that I'm still performing. But I've tried to get my songs to be relatively topical and about things that, as Jamie said, people find very hard to talk about. And I think that music is a way across the divide, really, of that people can actually listen to it, they can relate to it, and it opens up sort of, in a sense, it opens up a bit of a method of them being able to relate to it and potentially talk about something and listen to something and understand that other people do also have the same issues that they have and the same pains that they do, and they're not alone in the world, but listening to it in a manner actually which isn't as painful as just talking every day to a person, because music, I think, transverses actually languages, but also it at the same time, you can put a very, very painful message across with music that people will listen to without necessarily realizing they're listening to something quite that painful unless they relate to it. But it makes it much more out there for everybody, I think, to say that it is something that people do have and it's behind closed doors. So I mumbled that an awful lot and sort of don't know whether I expressed it correctly there, but
I think it was perfect. Thank you, Nicolette Street, for allowing us to use your song, You're So Cruel, to close the show, which means it is a goodbye from me, Lucy Hart, Jamie Dewson, and Nicolette Street.
Thank you for having us.
Farewell.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you.